No matter what sport it is, every athlete wants to go out on top, and NASCAR is no different. Ned Jarrett won 13 races and the championship in his final season, and more recently, Jeff Gordon won a race and made the championship 4 in his final full-time season, setting the bar incredibly high for those to come. But unfortunately, more often than not, the final seasons of most NASCAR drivers are pitiful at best. And usually, these seasons are preceded by even more bad seasons that ultimately made the driver want to retire in the first place. So hey, it's me, John, from the Daily Downforce, and today I want to talk to you about the worst final seasons in NASCAR history. Though it's worth noting I'm not going to talk about drivers who had their careers cut short due to death or other unforeseen circumstances, just out of respect. And no, I'm also not going to talk about guys like David Reagan or Quinn Houff. This is mostly going to be Hall of Famers who had uncharacteristically bad endings to their careers. First up on the list is Matt Kenseth, and I do feel a bit bad for including him because Matt wasn't really supposed to come back. After Kyle Larson uttered the gamer word in 2020, Matt Kenseth would swiftly be chosen as his replacement at Chip Ganassi Racing. Ganassi was by no means a top-tier team like Roush or Joe Gibbs when Kenseth drove for them at their peaks, but the 42 car had seen some decent success with Larson behind the wheel, and with a future Hall of Famer being tapped to drive it, people had high hopes for Matt Kenseth. In his first race back in nearly 2 years, he shocked everyone with a top 10 finish at Darlington. Could he be a serious playoff contender despite missing the first 4 races of the year? Well, no. All of that Matt Kenseth magic dried up just as quickly as it had appeared. And for the bulk of the season, he would be relegated to running in the mid-20s. Kenseth would suffer 5 DNFs in his 32 starts and countless more minor wrecks along the way. The only true highlight of the season aside from Darlington was a great run in Indianapolis where he finished second to Kevin Harvick, the same track Kenseth nearly won at running part-time in 2018. Despite never winning the Brickyard, Kenseth was oddly good there at the end of his career. But Kenseth would ultimately record his worst ever points finish and average finish of his career, and would quietly once again call it quits for good at the end of the season. Dale Earnhardt Jr. would likewise have a pretty underwhelming final season in 2017, though he managed to sit on the front row for his last Daytona 500 and fittingly score poles in his final starts at Daytona and Talladega. His success on Sundays was nowhere near as good. In fairness, Jr. was likely still battling some minor concussion symptoms after missing half of the 2016 season due to them. In total, Jr. would only record a single top 5 at Texas, 8 top 10s, which is at least better than Matt Kenseth, 7 DNFs, and he would miss the playoffs and finish 21st in points. Perhaps what was the most alarming though is how few laps he led. Only 47 across the entire season, the worst of his career. That's even fewer laps than he led in 2016 where he only ran 18 races. And the stretch from 2009 to 2011 where he was abysmal. It's a pretty sad end to the most popular driver's career, as in 2014 and 2015, it finally seemed like Jr. was clicking with his Hendrick group and rattling off multi-win seasons for the first time in a decade, before health issues would derail him once more. In his final Cup Series start at Homestead, Jr. would quietly finish 3 laps down in 25th place, a reflection of his overall season. At the very least, he was there to witness his good friend Martin Truex win his first Cup Series championship, but that aside, the 2017 season is one to forget for Junior Nation. But as bad as Dale Jr.'s final few years were, they were nothing compared to his teammate Jimmie Johnson, who fell straight off a cliff midway through the 2017 season. For the first 15 years of his career, Jimmie Johnson would win enough to make your stomach hurt, even if you were a Jimmie Johnson fan. But the last 3.5 seasons couldn't possibly be any different, because the moment he smacked that Turn 1 Pocono wall, he would never win again. In 2020, Johnson would record 5 top 5s, 10 top 10s, 5 DNFs, and an average finish of 17th. Not making it much more different from the 2018 or 2019 seasons. But beyond the on-track results, it felt like everything surrounding his retirement that could have went wrong. Needless to say, the COVID pandemic disrupted things quite a bit, not only forcing Johnson to miss his final race at Indianapolis due to testing positive, but it also meant there were no fans to see Jimmie off in the majority of his final races. It didn't help that when NASCAR was forced to go virtual for a couple months, Jimmie Johnson outright embarrassed himself in iRacing. He looked like Joe Nemechek puttering around at less than half the pace of the leaders, causing pileups anytime they'd pass him by. And in the 2 real-life races where Johnson looked like his old self, both ended in disaster. At Darlington, he looked to be cruising to an easy stage win, and just crashed himself on the last lap for no good reason. And at the Coca-Cola 600 a few weeks later, Johnson would finish an impressive 2nd place, only to have his car disqualified a few hours later. At the very least, Johnson was competitive in his final race as a full-time driver at Phoenix, finishing in 5th place, the highest of all non-championship cars, and passing the torch to teammate Chase Elliott, who had just won his first championship. But after 35 tough weeks, this was pretty much the only memorable moment of this final season. And in all honesty, it definitely didn't help that Kyle Larson took the same car and team that Jimmie struggled with for 3 years and won 10 races and a championship the very next season. Yeah, I know, it's not the 48 car anymore, but you know, Hendrick switcheroo. With an increase in performance that drastic, it certainly doesn't reflect well on Jimmie, giving us a rather unsatisfying ending to an otherwise legendary career. Hi there, are you enjoying this video? Great, then why not subscribe to the Daily Downforce for more great NASCAR content? You won't miss a single video and you can impress all your friends with all your NASCAR knowledge, so why not? But at the very least, Jimmie's winless drought only lasted 3 years. How about going your last 8 years winless? Well, there's no need to imagine because that's exactly what happened to Daryl Waltrip. After Alan Kulwicki proved it was possible to win in his own equipment, many other prolific 90s drivers followed suit, including Daryl Waltrip. And unlike Kulwicki, this would prove to be the beginning of the end for him. DW would have a decent year in 1992 driving for his own team, picking up 3 wins and finishing 9th in points, but this would ultimately be his last hurrah. As stated before, he went winless for the last 8 seasons, bouncing between various non-competitive teams, and in the last 5 years of his career, he would fail to lead more than 20 laps in a single season. For reference, Corey LaJoie has led more laps this year than Daryl in his last 5 years put together. And this is a top 10 driver of all time we're talking about. In his last season in 2000, Daryl would score 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, 1 top 20, 5 laps led, and an average finish of 31st. Perhaps the worst final season that any Hall of Fame driver has ever had. His sole memorable moment was qualifying 2nd for the Brickyard 400, the one race where he scored the aforementioned top 20 finish, ultimately ending up 11th. So at the very least, Daryl got one last brief moment in the sun on one of the sport's biggest stages. But there's still one driver left to discuss, and what if I told you it was nearly as bad as that last one? And surprisingly enough, it belongs to the king of NASCAR himself, Richard Petty. Petty was the first driver to put together a true retirement tour in 1992, showing his appreciation to the many fans he had accumulated over the course of 35 spectacular years. But unfortunately for Petty, his last season on the track wouldn't be much better than his previous 7. He failed to score a win, top 5, or top 10, and like Daryl, he'd only lead a measly 5 laps. His best performances all year would be 3 15th place finishes, and ultimately he would finish 26th in points. But with an average finish at 23rd, admittedly this final season is nowhere near as bad as Waltrip's. But you'd also be hard-pressed to find a driver who had a steeper fall-off towards the end of their careers as Richard Petty. So that's just a look at a few of the worst final seasons in NASCAR history. Were there any that I didn't discuss? Let me know in the comments down below. But don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.